So good evening and welcome. My name is Loretta Swift. I am the director of the Lewis T. Graves Memorial Public Library. And on behalf of the library, I thank you for joining us tonight at the beautiful Kennebunk River Club. We appreciate your support. We are also especially grateful for our in-kind sponsors and season sponsors: Bergen and Parkinson, Kennebunk Savings Bank, Partners Bank, and Robert and Marjorie Dennis. Thank you. Their generosity makes programs like this possible and helps the library continue to serve as a center for learning, discovery, and community. More than 60% of the library's budget is generated by donations and fundraising fundraising activities like the special program. Please join me in thanking all our sponsors, as well as our dedicated staff, volunteers, board, and our newly reconstituted host committee. I ask that you please continue to show your support by completing the short survey that was provided to you as part of our long-range planning process. If you complete the survey and provide your email address, you will be entered in to win a prize of your choice of absolutely fabulous library swag. Also, if you are interested in receiving our electronic newsletter, simply let us know by checking the appropriate box on the survey. Subscribers are notified on Mondays about upcoming programs, including speaking events like tonight's program. The timing of tonight's conversation with Jean Becker and Tom Collamore is especially fitting. As our nation marks the 250th anniversary of the United States, we have an opportunity to reflect not only on presidents and public figures, but on the countless individuals whose dedication and service have helped shape our history as a country. This evening also marks the first event in the library's summer-long series celebrating America's semi-quincentennial. We are excited to bring our community together through a variety of programs that explore our nation's history, culture, and civic life. To highlight some of them, on July 5th, we'll gather for America's Potluck on the Village Green, which is a community celebration of food, fellowship, and shared traditions. On July 11th, we invite you to enjoy the Secret Gardens of Kennebunks on one of the library's most beloved events. On July 30th, we are honored to welcome Ken Burns to Kennebunk High School for a sold-out program. And on September 24th, we look forward to hosting award-winning author Wally Lamb at Vinegar Hill. Together, these events celebrate the stories, ideas, and people that have shaped our nation over the past 250 years and continue to shape its future. Speaking of the future, tonight I want to recognize a very special young lady and the library's most recent winner of the Joyce Butler Historian Award. This year's contest invited fourth grade students at the Consolidated Elementary School to research the life and legacy of President George H.W. Bush and create an original piece inspired by his accomplishments, with particular focus on the Points of Light initiative. We are delighted to receive a record number of entries this year, with one in particular rising to the top. As you may know, the library presents the annual Joyce Butler Historian Award to a student who demonstrates an interest in history, civic engagement, and the individuals whose leadership has helped shape our nation and communities. This year, the winner entered a drawing which stood out for its creativity and thoughtful depiction of President Bush's commitment to volunteerism and public service. Her piece beautifully captured the spirit of the Points of Light organization and President Bush's belief that every individual has the power to make a positive and meaningful difference in the lives of others. Ms. Terry Bald, would you please come up to present the award? Thank you. So you all probably know Terry as our children's librarian, so thank you, Terry, for being here to present the award tonight. And without further ado, I announce the winner as Cameron Altman. Congratulations, Cameron. Cameron's piece is on display in the back in the entrance. If you have a moment to take a peek, it's absolutely beautiful. I want to thank the teachers and the fourth grade students who participated in this award ceremony. We had a record number of turnouts, and they were all fabulous. So I want to take a moment to thank all of you for being with us tonight and for supporting the library's mission to foster continual learning, meaningful dialogue, and community connection. Now I welcome Vicki Lamar, board trustee, to the stage to introduce Jean Becker and Tom Collamore.
Whoa. Good evening, everyone. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our two very special guests tonight, Jean Becker and Tom Collamore, both of whom I am honored to call friends. Tonight promises to be a wonderfully engaging evening, full of history, humor, behind-the-scenes stories, and a rare glimpse into the world of presidential advance. Jean brings an extraordinary perspective on the presidency. She served as Chief of Staff to President George H.W. Bush for nearly 25 years, following earlier roles as Deputy Press Secretary to First Lady Barbara Bush and as a newspaper reporter, including 4 years at USA Today. She is the editor of Pearls of Wisdom by Barbara Bush and the author of The Man I Knew and Character Matters, both drawn from her remarkable years with President Bush and his family. Tom first met President Bush in 1978 as his driver and went on to become part of his trusted inner circle. He served in a variety of roles during the Reagan and Bush 41 administrations and has advised the George and Barbara Bush Foundation for more than 30 years. He's built a distinguished career as a senior corporate executive, trade association leader, and founder of Collamore Consulting Group. And tonight, we have the special pleasure of hearing from them about their new book, Don't Tell the President: The Best, Worst, and Mostly Untold Stories from Presidential Advance, a lively and fascinating look at the planning, personalities, mishaps, and magic behind presidential events, and the stories the public rarely gets to hear. We are honored to have them with us this evening, and I know we are all in for a terrific conversation. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jean Becker and Tom Collamore.
Okay, I'm feeling a little homesick. Oh no, okay, don't make me cry. It's so nice to be here and so nice to see all of you. I really can't say how, okay, let's move on. I am a little disappointed by the spotlight because when I was sitting over there in that dark little corner, at least 20 of you told me that I looked fabulous and had not aged one bit. And now this light, anyway, we'll move on. Okay, don't tell the president.
This is what it's like on tour with Jean, by the way.
Did I give you permission to talk yet? We have started fighting, and I just want you to know for the record, his wife Jake here in the front row, she's always on my side when we disagree. So, anyway, this is a book I wanted to write for a while. After I did The Man I Knew, my editor, I pitched this book idea to my editor in New York, and he talked me into writing the book Character Matters first. He felt the world had more to learn from George Herbert Walker Bush. And he was right. The Character Matters was his idea, and it was just a wonderful book to put together about how wise that man was. But after Character Matters was done, I went back to him with Don't Tell the President, and he said yes, we'll do this book. Well, I was feeling a little overwhelmed, so I did the smartest thing I had done in a long time. I asked this man to be my co-author. I wasn't even drinking. We were having breakfast in College Station, Texas, President Bush's library, and Tom, you weren't drinking either.
Why are you buttering me up now? What?
You'll see.
Okay.
Anyway, so we did this book, and it's a book of essays. Just for those of you who've read Character Matters, it's also a book of essays. There are 96 separate contributors to this book.
Unsung heroes.
Unsung heroes, and it covers its stories from LBJ through President Obama. We purposely did not ask for advanced stories from President Biden or President Trump's teams. It's too soon. These are all stories better told when they're in the rearview mirror. Some years need to pass. We had some trouble with some of the authors. There's this unspoken rule, what happens on the road stays on the road, but we finally talked them into telling us their stories.
One at a time, we made the sale, yeah. We build the trust, it took that, but it's good. But it's a bipartisan book. It begins, as Jean said, with a Lyndon Johnson story going all the way back to 1960, and it goes through the Obama administration. So 60 years of presidential history, which I love to tell audiences, if you don't read it or you're just going to listen to it in the car, get it for your kids or your grandkids, because they're not reading anymore. And this is a really good, sneaky way to get them to learn modern presidential history.
It's a fun book. I just have to say one thing to all of you who know me well. I have to make notes on what I want to talk about, because the older I get, if I don't have notes, I wander off into a weird direction. And here...
The notes aren't going to matter tonight.
Here, I'm thinking, if I wander off into a weird direction, I'm afraid I'm going to spill what I read in Barbara Bush's diary about some of you. So I'm going to stick to my notes. No, you may not see me later. Okay, we're going to start out by telling a couple of stories that show just how important presidential advance is. First, maybe we should explain when a president travels, when a vice president travels, when the first lady travels, candidates travel, and a lot of you already know this if you live here, because I think there have been some presidents who have shown up here before. There's an advance team that comes out ahead just to make sure, the logistics are right, and that by the time Air Force One lands, everything goes smoothly. So we're going to tell some of the behind-the-scenes stories that show how complicated it can be when you lead up to that perfect moment. So we're going to tell you two very different stories of how advance can make a difference.
I did that right. It worked. This is a story from 1987. I think a lot of you might recognize this picture. It became a pretty iconic and historic picture. But that's President Reagan at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin telling Mr. Gorbachev to tear down this wall. That did not happen by accident. It happened because the pre-advance team came to Berlin, and the host government in Berlin and the U.S. Embassy wanted this speech to be held in either the Reichstag or a hotel ballroom, indoors. And the head of advance for Reagan looked out the window of the Reichstag and saw this scene and said, wait a minute, we're missing the whole point. And he was successful in getting this event moved to where you see it here, despite the fact this is still communist Berlin on the east side. People are dying every day, bravely trying to cross over to the west. And Reagan was there to send an unmistakable message, and because of the planning of the advance team, he was able to do that, and it was an important moment in the march toward the fall of the wall and the end of the Cold War. And now that sounds like I've really overstated an advance guy's role, but in this case, it really made a difference. The vision, the thinking on your feet allowed a normal speech with an important message to become an iconic one and an historic one.
You can't imagine President Reagan giving that speech inside a hotel ballroom and saying, you know that wall that's out there, out the window, it wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah.
My story is a little different. It's 1988. Vice President George H.W. Bush had lost big time the Iowa caucus, the first test of the 88 campaign. He actually came in third, came to New Hampshire, cleaned up, won the New Hampshire primary. Bob Dole came in first in Iowa. But after New Hampshire, Senator Dole is headed to Florida to try to resuscitate his team. And he gets a call on the plane on the way to Florida from a good friend who said, Senator Dole, I have the perfect event for you. Universal Studios is building a theme park near Orlando. It's going to mean big bucks, a lot of jobs. It's just the perfect place for you to come, sir, to talk about the economy, what you're going, jobs, everything that's important to you. Can you come this afternoon? And Senator Dole said, yes, I absolutely can come this afternoon. Well, he gets off the phone, and the head of his advance, a guy named Mike Lake, happens to be on the plane with him, and he says to Senator Dole, no, no, no. Let me get an advance team there. We don't know anything about this site. Let's go either tomorrow afternoon or maybe even the next day. We need to find out what does it look like, who's there. Let the advance team do their job. And Senator Dole overruled him. He said, I trust my friend. We're going this afternoon. So they get to the site, and here were the people who greeted Senator Dole. What that would be, in case you don't know, that would be Daffy Duck, Frankenstein, Charlie Chaplin. Mae West was also there to greet, and they kicked Mae West out of the photo, which I fear is very misogynistic. But there was nobody there. It was a bunch of bulldozers. It was a construction site. There was really nobody there. These were the greeters.
Woody Woodpecker, by the way.
Is it Woody Woodpecker? I always say Daffy Duck. It is Woody. Anyway, just by coincidence, later that day, Senator Dole fired his top campaign team. And unfortunately, it had nothing to do with this event, but unfortunately, most of the newspapers in the country ran this photo with that story.
It wasn't actually unfortunate at all.
Well, let me just, wait a minute. I have decided. Supposedly, it was a friend of Senator Dole's who called the plane. I think it was somebody from Vice President Bush's campaign. Because
let's just say we weren't sad when this was on the cover of the New York Times the next day.
Anyway, the whole point is Advance would have saved him from this. If he would have listened to his head of Advance, the Advance team would have gone and said, yeah, we won't be going there. So anyway, now that I got to tell a funny story, your turn.
Yeah, one more oops story where things just kind of happened. This is from 1991, the state arrival visit of the Queen, and this is universally known as the talking purple hat moment. That's because you have the 6'2" president and the 5'3" queen. And what normally happens is someone introduces the president at this podium called the Blue Goose, and in the bottom of it is a step stool that gets pulled out, and the introducer, who is almost always shorter than the president, stands on the step stool. The president comes forward, he kicks it in seamlessly, and everybody looks great. Well, at a state arrival ceremony, the president introduces and goes first, and the Queen came up, and nobody thought about pulling out the step stool. So this is the result. The chief of protocol at the time, a flamboyant fellow I think some of you might know, have known, Joseph Werner Reed, lamented that this was the worst moment of his entire life. And he was worried that it would show up in his New York Times obituary. It did. But the Queen had an amazingly great sense of humor in addition to being a very gracious lady. And the next day, she literally brought the House down to a joint session of Congress. She began by saying, I do hope all of you can see me from where you are today. And that diffused the situation. Gordon James, a legendary Bush 41 advance man, was responsible for this event. He took the blame, still talks about it to this day. But at the end of the day, it all worked out, and the Queen had a lovely visit. So,
The book is, as you can already tell just from the few stories we've told, it has a little bit of everything. It has a lot of humor, but there is a chapter in the book, and this was our editor's idea. It was a great, when we were organizing the book, I think it's the third chapter in the book, is called Advancing History. And that is where we put all the stories, quite frankly, that are just a little more somber. It begins with the day that Sarah Jane Moore tried to assassinate President Ford. Of course, President Reagan's assassination attempt. It ends with 9/11, which Tom is actually going to talk about in a minute. But one of probably the most gripping photo in the book is this story. I had a hard time telling this story at first. I've gotten better. This is President Obama at Sandy Hook. I don't need to tell you what happened. This is Newtown, Connecticut, where a shooter took out the entire first grade class. And the guy who advanced this for President Obama did a wonderful job of writing an essay, the toughest advance he had to do. And what's happening here is the president had already met with the families who had lost children, but he's getting ready to go out to address the entire town of Newtown, Connecticut, basically. And he told the staff he needed the room. This is a picture, and when Tom and I talked about, one of the most important jobs a president has is to be comforter in chief. And this is one of the toughest things they do. And he told
you never know when it's going to be thrust upon you.
You just don't ever know when it's going to happen. And President Obama told his staff, I need the room. He asked them to leave him alone. And I'm very grateful to his photographer, Pete Souza, who's a famous White House photographer. Pete was smart enough to shoot this photo before he left the room. One of the stories missing from this chapter that we looked really hard for with the help of President Clinton's team, we wanted the advanced person who advanced President Clinton to Oklahoma City to write an essay, but they couldn't find him. So that is one of the stories missing from this chapter. But Tom's going to talk about the story that's at the end.
I think we all know where this picture was taken as well. There's an essay in the book that's quite poignant. It's written by a gentleman, Brian Montgomery, who was President George W. Bush's head of advance. And he was on Air Force One and with the president on 9/11. And so he takes you from Florida to the two Air Force bases, back to Washington, so the president could address the nation from the Oval Office and, show that America was still here and leading and ready to respond. He takes us to the Pentagon the next day, where the president visited, then to the National Cathedral service, but most importantly, I think, to the visit to Ground Zero. And talks about how they identified the crushed NYFD SUV that the president stood on with a bullhorn next to an older-looking firefighter who'd been up for 48 hours, and let the world know that America was going to respond. And after that moment, he went to the Javits Center and met with the families of the first responders who were missing from the attacks, which, as you can imagine, was just an excruciatingly difficult few hours. And so Brian talks about then getting home that night to his townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. And he's going to get undressed, and he looks down at his feet, and his dress shoes are covered in white paste from Ground Zero. And he's just frozen. I mean, what can I do? I can't clean these. And he puts them in a plastic bag, and then the next day puts them in a plastic bin, and 25 years later, they're still in his closet. And every year on 9/11, he goes and gives a talk somewhere. In fact, he's speaking at the Reagan Library, thanks
because
to
of our book.
the essay in the book.
Yeah, they've invited him to come tell his story.
But I recommend that essay to you in particular. It's quite poignant. And, it talks subtly about what the staff's role is to create the environment for the commander-in-chief in this situation to execute his responsibilities without distraction. And so advance is a lot of planning, but it's also being able to respond to a moment and continue to create an environment where the president can do his job.
I don't usually do this, but so many of you knew and loved George and Barbara Bush. I'm going to tell you my 9/11 story. Andy Umblad, where are you?
He's
I
back
don't see him.
Back right.
Were you on the detail on 9/11 yet? Yes. Were you with them on 9/11? No. All right. So we were in Washington, D.C. The Bushes had founded a group, a national cancer group called Sea Change, and they were devoted to fighting cancer because of their daughter Robin. And we'd had our big annual meeting on September 10th. They were wheels up at Reagan National Airport early on 9/11. They were headed to Minneapolis, St. Paul to give a speech. I stayed in D.C. because I was on the board of this group. And then 9/11 happens, and I was really concerned about where they were. I knew their plane, I knew they had not made it to Minneapolis. I knew their plane had been grounded somewhere. So I called the Secret Service here. We were obviously still here then. I called the Secret Service, and Andy, it was Redsy who answered the phone. And I said, I need to know, where are they? I'm just curious where they are. And he asked me if I was on a classified line. I said, I was on my hotel room phone. And he said, I cannot tell you because where they are is completely classified. But they're worried about you. They want to know, are you okay? And I said, I'm at the Renaissance Hotel in D.C. I'm fine. So fast forward, I assume they were in West Virginia. I think all of you know, I think it's now public knowledge that there's is it, Andy, is it public?
Let's keep moving.
There's a nuclear, the Washington, D.C. was going to, everybody knows about the secret tunnels in West Virginia where they take people in case of nuclear war. And if that's not public knowledge, it cannot leave this room. And I know where you live. So anyway, I assume they're in West Virginia. So I get a call that night. We're at the hotel. We're in the hotel lobby of the Renaissance in D.C. The hotel had kindly put big TVs in the lobby, which was also their bar, so we're waiting for the President of the United States to address the nation. And my cell phone rang. Everybody was very surprised because cell phone service was not good in D.C. that day. And I answered the phone, and it was the 41st President of the United States. And I was so happy to hear his voice. And he said, Jean, are you okay? And I said, yes, I was not at the Pentagon. I'm fine. It was so sweet how worried they were about me. And I said, I know you can't tell me where you are, but I'm just so glad to hear your voice. And President Bush said, well, why can't I tell you where I am? And I said, because the Secret Service told me it was classified, and I'm on my cell phone. You can't tell me. And he said, classified? We're at the Hampton Inn outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Their plane had been grounded in Milwaukee. President Bush told me that he thinks the entire Chicago Secret Service field office showed up. He said, I've never seen so much Secret Service. I want you to picture the poor guy at the front desk of a Hampton Inn in the suburbs of Milwaukee when this motorcade pulls in, and out gets Georgia Barbara Bush. And President Bush said, yeah, we've been here all day. He says, we feel safe. We don't think anybody would look for us here. And then he said, he had talked to the president a couple times. He was so proud of him. He said, about an hour and a half ago, Bar and I realized we literally had not eaten all day. And we decided right across the street, Jean, is an Outback Steakhouse. So we walked across the street, and he said, people seemed surprised when we walked in. So once again, I want you to picture it's 9/11, and you're at Outback Steakhouse, and in walks not only the former president and first lady, but the parents of the current president of the United States. Anyway, I don't usually tell that story. It's not in the book. I put it in I think it's in The Man I Knew. But so you guys knew them, and is that just not classic George Bush? We're at the Hampton Inn. I'm like, okay.
All right, I think you're going to tell a little story about another President
Yes,
Bush who
I
took
am.
a very interesting trip.
Very interesting. So the next picture, while all of us were eating Thanksgiving dinner 2003, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, secretly flew to Iraq to have dinner with the troops in Baghdad. This was unheard of for Air Force One to secretly go abroad. The security was unbelievable. I will tell you, really, it's one of the best essays in the book, and you really just have to read the essay to see how they pulled this off. And the security was just incredible. I'm going to fast forward. This is the president greeting the troops. The Greg Jenkins, the advanced person who wrote it, he said they kept it so under wraps. They're about ready to announce the president to this, hundreds of troops. And the last minute, he panicked, thinking that the troops would think it was a comedian who was imitating the president, that they would never believe their commander-in-chief was there. Well, on the way home, the reporters who went with them, they'd had their phones and their laptops confiscated, and they were told they were going to give them back on the way home so they could go ahead and tell the whole world where the president had been that day. But he did something that was really smart. He called his parents to tell them where he had been and why they had not had Thanksgiving dinner together. And I think as soon as he hung up with his parents, I got a call for the 41st President of the United States. He said, Jean, did you know that George was going to Baghdad today? Did they tell you? Well, no, of course they had not told me. And he said, he would have told me. I'm his dad. I'm the former president. I used to be head of the CIA. The problem is his mother has a big mouth.
But even she never talked about West Virginia tunnels.
Okay, how many of you here already knew there were tunnels in West Virginia? Okay, who are you people back there? You apparently are the only ones who knew. I see Hap Ellis knew. I think he raised his hand. Anyway, I do, you'll be proud of me, particularly Betsy Hemingway, one of Barbara Bush's best friends. When I got this phone call from President Bush, I just listened. I didn't agree or disagree. I just said, okay, have a nice day, bye.
Good strategy.
Yeah, good strategy.
Since we're in Maine.
We're in Maine. We're going to pivot.
We're going to pivot.
Look familiar?
It's awfully fun to be back here.
It's really fun.
I had the honor of coming here summer after summer, starting in the 1980s when George Bush was vice president. And when he was getting ready to run for president, we had a pretty dedicated group of reporters that would follow him wherever he was going. It was not quite a press pool, but it was a press gaggle anyway. And one of the strategies that Marlin Fitzwater employed, Marlin had been recruited to be the vice president's press secretary before President Reagan stole him, and then President Bush kept him. But at this point, Marlin was trying to help figure out how we would get some of these reporters to cut us a break and write some decent stories. And one of the tools of the trade was to give them a ride on Fidelity. Now, this picture is actually perfect because the president liked to drive Fidelity at a fairly high rate of speed, and we'd have reporters on the boat, and I'm reminded of one incident when Tom Pettit of NBC News, who was a great guy, he didn't break his back, but he didn't walk the same for a while. And it was then that we discussed with Marlin that maybe this wasn't the best strategy for getting reporters to think better of what we were doing. But I know you have a few stories too.
So many of you have great boat stories. Before I tell the advanced story, I had a friend visit. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and I had a friend visiting me back from my hometown. And it was Saturday morning. We were going to drive over. I was going to take her to New Hampshire and Vermont for the day and just show her the mountains. Unfortunately, I had to run by the office to pick something up. And I walk in the office, and there sits President Bush. And he said, "Oh my gosh, your timing's perfect. I want to go fishing, and I can't find anybody. Will you go fishing with me?" And I'm thinking, of course, my friend from Missouri, her mouth is open about this far. And I said, "Paula, what would you, go fishing. We're going to go fishing with the president." So the boat was at the Yachtsman. It was not at the point. It was at the Yachtsman. So we're putting down the river pretty decently, slowly. And President Bush looked at my friend Paula and said, "Paula, do you have good sea legs? How do you do on boats on the ocean?" To which my friend Paula said, "Mr. President, I have never been in a boat on the ocean in my entire life." And we get to the mouth of the river, and he said, "Let's see what you're made of." And he floored it. That could be that day. I don't know. Anyway, the next picture, I hope you can see, that is Vladimir Putin in that boat. George W. I think it was I do have a picture. President Bush introduced me to Putin. We were standing on the pier at Walker's Point, and if I knew then what I know now, I would have pushed him off. But anyway, I'd probably be dead. But so, the President of the United States wants to bring, he wants to have a bilateral here with the President of Russia. And you all remember this, I think it was 2007, but before I tell the advanced story, there was a big storm that came through, and it took out the living room. This is not the big storm that destroyed the whole bottom floor of Walker's Point when he was president. But there was a storm that took out, all of the first floor of Walker's Point had flooded. And Mrs. Bush was in the process of ordering furniture and redoing definitely the living room. Well, I get a call, I think from, the National Security Advisor. The Bushes were overseas, they were in Europe, and I get a call, it was Steve
Hadley.
Thank you. Steve Hadley, and he said, "Jean, Secretary Rice is in Moscow and is going to be meeting with President Putin in just a little bit, and the president wants her to invite him to come meet with him at Walker's Point in June. Can you sign off on that?" "No, I cannot." I said, "The only person who can sign off on that is his mother, and she is in Europe." I can hear Katie Presley laughing. And anyway, and I told him about the storm. I said, "You need to know," we were still in Houston, "you need to know that there's no living room, and Mrs. Bush has to get all new furniture, everything has to be redone." I said, "I'm not sure this is going to work." Well, about 2 minutes later, our receptionist buzzes me and says, "The president's on the phone for you." And I said, "What president?" And she said, "The President of the United States of America." I'm like, okay. Because there are young people here, I'm not going to say exactly what he said. But he basically said, "Becker, Condi is literally sitting outside of Putin's office, so yes or no?" And then he just started yelling at me, and I said, "Okay, you make the decision. You're the President of the United States. You're the oldest son. Don't put this on me." And he says, "Well, I say yes." I'm like, okay. So that's how this all started. And before Putin arrived, the White House sent up a pre-advance. It was headed by Deputy Chief of Staff Joe Hagan. And Joe Hagan's job was to take the Russians all around Walker's Point to show them where Putin would stay and everything that was going to happen. My job was to escort them. My job was to be at the back of the pack. It was a lot of people, Secret Service, White House, all the Russians. And I was just supposed to, start to walk them around. Well, the Russians were just terrible. They asked about, I'm not making this up, they wanted Ocean Avenue houses completely cleared out, that everybody had to move out. They wanted snipers behind every rock and behind every bush. They wanted an aircraft carrier right outside on the Atlantic. And Joe was doing it. Joe was basically, no, and I'm just, it was 2 hours. We get to the pier, and Fidelity is sitting there. And Joe says, now, the plan is, as soon as President Putin arrives, the first President Bush is going to take President Putin and the President of the United States out for a ride on his boat. And this, after 2 hours of them bitching about every rock and bush being dangerous, they go, okay. Well, I don't know what got into me. I was tired, I was hangry. And I said, let me get this straight. You're worried about that bush over there, and you're worried about that rock over there, but you're not worried about an 83-year-old madman taking the two most powerful people in the world out on that boat. The look that Joe Hagan gave me, it is shocking that I'm still alive. And I just want to say that nobody died. But as they left the pier, the first photo you saw would have been an more accurate picture of them leaving the pier. Are there? I know the young. Are there still young people here?
No, they're gone. They went to bed. They're gone.
Joe Hagan. I was standing with Joe Hagan as Fidelity left the Cove, and Joe looked at me and said, "Oh shit." But they lived. Anyway, that is. They should have pushed him out of the boat. Anyway. You can show the next picture.
Oh, well, let me do that.
This is one of my favorite pictures. This is actually 1989. He is President of the United States. Iraq has just invaded Kuwait, and that all happened while he was here. He's literally reading classified briefing papers.
Which you cannot read on that picture, I promise you.
Yeah. While he's fishing off the back of Fidelity. We're going to take Q&A in a couple of minutes if we have time. So think about if you have any questions. We're going to leave this picture up here. We're so honored that Andy Onblad's here tonight. Andy, come on up. Andy was the head of President Bush's detail for how many years, Andy? Andy wrote one of my favorite essays in the book, and he's agreed. I did tell him he had to tell the USA Today version of the story and not the New York Times, but I thought you all would love to hear one of Andy's wildest advanced stories. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not used to speaking. I'm used to watching people speak. So this is not my thing. But this was pre 9/11. So the whole world changed, obviously. It was 1996. I was doing an advance in Damascus, Syria, for the former president. And the plan was for him to go to Damascus and then helicopter to Beirut. Beirut at the time, there was no commercial or private planes coming in and out of Beirut. So the only way was helicopter. So we set up the advance, and due to some unforeseen intelligence, it was decided that choppering was not the way to go. We couldn't do it. And so the plan was to go take a motorcade from Damascus to Beirut, which unfortunately there's only one road between the two. It's about a 2-hour drive, but it goes right through the Becker Valley, which is home of Hezbollah, and it's where all their training camps are. So, you know, there was some talk about saying, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. That was my vote. I'll have to say right off that I said, you know, maybe we could do something else. But President Bush decided, no, we're going to do it. We're going to drive. And my counterparts at the National Police in Damascus, they were not real happy about it. But well, why? Well, I couldn't tell them. It was just not. I wasn't able to explain the intelligence to him, obviously.
It's like the tunnels in West Virginia.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Right, yeah. So we put together a plan. Nobody was real happy about driving President Bush, but he insisted on it. I've got to get there. I've got to get there. And we were at the palace in Damascus with the first President Assad. And he came out. They were at a meeting, and they came out, and President Bush said, Well, President Assad has assured me that it'll be safe, no problems. And he's going to give me his presidential security detail, and they're going to take us right now. So we said, okay, well, that's great. They pulled the cars up, and we all just kind of jumped in. The problem was that there were no cell phones in Syria at the time. So communications, it was a little difficult. And the plan was to drive to the border of Lebanon, right in the middle, right in the heart of the Bekaa Valley, change motorcades into a Lebanese motorcade, and then they'd take them to Beirut. So we jumped in the motorcade. Everyone just, because it was a different motorcade, it was all new, so we jumped in, everyone just trying to find a seat, and took off. Well, it took us about 3 minutes before we realized that their electronic countermeasures were jamming our radios. So here we are heading off. We have no contact with the motorcade that's supposed to meet us. We couldn't talk to the cars in the motorcade because we were all jammed. There were no cell phones. So anyway, we got down there hoping that the motorcade was going to meet us, so we're not just, ended up alone there in the middle of the Bekaa Valley. Luckily, we got there, and I had told everybody, okay, once we get there, get to the cars. This is not a place we want to hang around. So we get there. Luckily, the other motorcade was there, and President Bush decided to take pictures with the security guys from, and so here they are. He gets out and there's, shaking hands, taking pictures, and we're just looking around. Are you kidding me? And but that's just the way it was. But the strange thing, one of the strangest things, was that the head of the security for Assad, the general, had decided that my name was Syrian. Well, I'm as Swedish as they come, but so so I guess we had a special bond. So so we were kind of standing off to the side where all these pictures were being taken, because of course the Syrians had theirs, and then the Lebanese guys had to get in, and and so he grabbed my hand. So we're standing off to the side, and I'm holding hands with a Syrian general, which is an Arab custom. It's so, and just one of the most bizarre things in my life was just standing there watching this going on in the middle of a terrorist central, and holding hands with a Syrian general. But anyway, they took off. They went to Beirut, and the good news, we had to do it again in reverse the next day, because there was, we weren't helicoptering back, but everything worked out fine, but just very strange as far as advance goes.
That's a great story.
You don't know, and you've got to be able to adjust right like that. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
I don't know why, but his reference to President Bush wanting to shake every hand in one of the more dangerous spots on the planet reminded me of the time John Meacham likes to talk about, where he shook the hand of a mannequin when he was campaigning. And when asked about it, he said, "Hey, you never know."
That was in his eulogy.
It wasn't.
It was in his
It wasn't
eulogy at
his
the
eulogy,
National Cathedral.
But yeah.
Oh
Can
my
I,
gosh.
one other thing that Andy's story, I won't tell the whole story, but the whole communications thing is an interesting aspect of advance. And it's evolved over time. I mean, when I was working with Betsy Hemingway on the campaign almost 47 years ago, or whatever it was, nobody had a cell phone. We lived by landlines and fax machines. And now everything's obviously instantaneous and all of that. But there's a story in the book about Chelsea Clinton almost being abandoned at the Kremlin in Moscow. And the reason that happened is because the motorcade was supposed to pick her up as the Clintons were heading to the airport at the end of a state visit. And because the Russians were jamming the Secret Service frequencies, they were jamming, frankly, their own frequencies. I mean, everything was impossible. The motorcade left her. And she and her advance person and the Secret Service agent commandeered a laundry van at the Kremlin and chased the motorcade all the way to the airport. where the KGB finally figured out they probably ought to let the first daughter in to the airport to get on the plane, and she ran up to the stairs as the Clintons were ascending and said, like any teenager would, "Did you forget something?" It's a fun story in the book.
We would love to know, if you have questions, we're happy to take questions.
Any
If you
questions.
don't, we'll just tell more stories, but we would love to know.
That's an incentive to ask a question.
Yeah, that's definitely an incentive to ask a question. Who has a question? Just get up and shout it.
Shout it, just stand up and
All the way
shout it
back
out, we'll
there.
repeat it.
You mentioned one that wasn't in the book. Are there things that left on the cutting room floor for particular reasons? You don't have to share the story, but what did you leave out? Why did you leave it out?
You know, the biggest problem with the book, once the word got out, the stories just started pouring in. And we could not write one more word than 100,000 words. This is all about the cost of producing the book. Our editor literally said, Jean, there could be 99,999 words. So there was a lot left on the cutting room floor. And one of the things we're going to do is we are at some point going to start emailing those out. Tom has started a Substack column. I have an email blast that goes out, but some of those stories were actually really, really good. Unfortunately, most of the stories that got cut were about 41 because there's still a lot of stories about him in the book, but there are a lot more stories about him. There was some stuff that left on the cutting room floor. One of the better essays in the book, also written by a Secret Service agent, a woman named Barbara Riggs, when she was just starting out, was sent to Panama to advance President Carter, who was going to Panama to sign the Panama Canal Treaty. And it's a fascinating essay about what was going on. She was both Secret Service and sort of CIA on that trip. Noriega became obsessed with her.
He was not the head of Nicaragua then, but he was on
not
the
president
rise.
yet.
But
Yeah, he was like the current Panamanian president's muscle person. And Barbara was a little worried because there's a lot of cloak and dagger stuff in her essay. It's still really good. And she said, maybe somebody should read this. And I said, we got the person. I sent it to Bob Gates. And Bob Gates read it, and he didn't take a lot out, but there was some stuff in it that needed to come out.
That's a good example. We also did a lot of self-vetting. Advanced folks are very talented. They also tend to sometimes exaggerate things a little bit. And we did want the stories in the book to be accurate. I think we did a pretty good job of that. But we have some stories that might still need some vetting that didn't make the book.
Great question.
What else?
Any other questions?
I'll ask one. Both 41 and 43 love to play golf. And are there any stories about Cape Arundel Golf Course that you can share?
I don't, because I was never on the golf course with either one of them. Do you have any stories?
Well, of course, you're aware that it's actually not golf. It's I guess you could call it speed golf. Would that be fair, Hap? Or what? Yeah. Or polo with rock. No, my reference would be 41. He loved playing golf up here. Both Presidents Bush were very sensitive about not overdoing it on the golf front when there were significant issues around the world or when our own men and women were in harm's way, so they kind of cooled it on the golf front. But they were big fans, and they loved to play with professional golfers and other folks who were a lot better than them also. And somehow they always won. I don't know, there's something about being president that a 6-foot putt is actually a gimme. I don't know.
You should see Hap Ellis after this, because Hap played a lot of golf with his uncle and probably his first cousin, and I think Hap would have stories. I see you back there. Okay, another question.
There's one over there.
Yeah.
Mostly just want to say thank you for writing this book. I feel like
Oh.
we need this. Like, we need to laugh and know that there's some unpredictables behind the curtain. I mean, unfortunately, we're seeing way too many things in front of the curtain.
Yes.
That's the living daylights out of all of us. But this is really fun and interesting and gives us a whole perspective
Well, thank you.
No,
Thank you
you're kind.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are very proud of the fact that it's a bipartisan book. And there's stories, again, everybody from LBJ through President Obama. So
I
thank
want to
you.
give a shout out, though. Both Team Clinton and Team Obama convened virtual meetings with us, with their top advanced people, and brainstormed with us about what stories should be in this book, because they got it, and they understood they should be a part of this. And I think it makes it a much better story.
It makes it a much better book, and I will tell you, to your point, there's so much more on the level of like advance. There's so much more cooperation and camaraderie that people understand. Unfortunately, there was a huge tragedy before the G7 summit. A longtime Bush advanced person for 41 and 43 was advancing part of the G7 advanced team, and he fell, and he died. They got him back. They medevaced him back to Andrews Air Force Base, and they kept him. I hope he knew how much he was loved, because advanced people are really. I did not know him, unfortunately, but he was beloved.
But it's an example.
It's a great example, because Joe Hagan, again, 43's Deputy Chief of Staff and very close to 41, Joe asked Tom and I to help get the word out about Joe's death. And so we both, Tom through his Substack column, me through my email blast that has like 1,000 people on it. We got the word out, and then I sent it also. We have all 96 of our contributors in one file, and I sent it to them. What was really touching is how many emails I got from President Clinton and President Obama advanced people saying, oh my gosh, we loved him. He was wonderful. He taught us a lot. And they'd worked together like at G7 summits, at opening of presidential libraries. It was really touching.
There's an advance manual. It's not classified, actually. But it's actually a bipartisan document. It was created back during the Nixon administration by a guy named Ron Walker, who's a legendary advance fellow, and he actually did the trip to China, opening up China. But Jim Carville of Clinton World fame bragged about stealing the advance manual and doing it better than you guys. But the manual actually is passed down from generation to generation, and it is truly
And
a
different
bipartisan
parties.
thing. That
Yeah.
the practice of this is the same, no matter who the principal is. So.
Any other questions? Okay, Jake.
Uh-oh.
Okay, this is Tom's wife, and Jake. We had a book event in D.C. yesterday, and Jake asked good questions. So ask me, Jake, because your husband doesn't think you should ask questions.
But I think it would be really fun. You all have so many fabulous stories. I think this group would love to hear this story from the people who had a couple glasses of vodka and.
Oh.
This is pretty good.
You tell that one, and I'll tell the Texas one. Okay, you tell the vodka one. The chandelier.
I got it.
Okay.
I got it. I've read the book.
Why do you sort of looked at me like
Seriously?
vodka? Okay, anyway.
This is kind of a legendary story. I think in the book it's told by Gene Gibbons, who's a Reuters veteran reporter, but it actually goes back to the Nixon era. You know, anytime you travel to the Soviet Union or China, you're always advised by other branches of our government to be very careful. You're always being watched, you're always being eavesdropped on, your room is ransacked whenever you leave it. You know, there's nothing sacred or private when you're traveling in those places. And some gentlemen who were advancing Nixon probably had a little vodka that evening, and they were in their room, and they were like, let's find the bug. We got to find the bug. It's here somewhere. We're going to find it. And they're searching and searching and searching, and someone pulls back the rug, and there's this complicated, myriad of ropes and other things. This is it. This is it. And they start taking all of this apart, and the next thing you know, they hear this huge crash down below. That would be the big crystal chandelier in the ballroom that they just...
I don't maybe it was yesterday, but somewhere where I either told this story or you told, anyway, somebody who had been to the Soviet Union and had been warned about all of that, and they told us the story, and I think they were with their wife or somebody, and they were complaining about something in the room that wasn't quite right. They didn't like I can't remember, but they were just talking to each other about
This was in China.
This was in China.
And it was, somebody wanted
Right.
something, something to drink that they couldn't find or whatever, and they were complaining about it to a colleague, and literally a minute later, there's a knock on the door.
So living my life in Texas and Maine, you all are completely different people from the people in Texas. I don't think this would have happened in Maine. So it's 1992, the campaign, and the Clinton-Gore campaign bus is doing a tour through Texas. Pretty gutsy of them, considering Texas is not going to vote for them. It would be the home state of the sitting president of the United States of America. But they're coming through Texas, to their credit, to do a campaign tour. And two young advanced guys, just out of college, very young. They're in Corsicana, Texas, which is halfway between Houston and Dallas. And early one morning, their job is to jump ahead of the campaign bus by half a day, and figure out where in every town the bus should come, City Park, set it up, some kind of campaign rally. Well, they lock themselves out of the car. And they're just can't believe they did this. And then it's like a miracle. On the same street, they see a sign, locksmith. And they just can't believe it. So they go running to the locksmith, into the shop, and then they did the dumbest thing they possibly could have done. We're from the Clinton-Gore campaign, and we're here to advance Governor Clinton and Senator Gore, and we just locked ourselves out of our car, and we're just so grateful you're here and can get us back into our car. To which this good old Texas boy, and he was sitting in a rocking chair, which makes it perfect, says to these two young kids, "I don't do outside jobs." Well, of course, that makes no sense. I'm sure most locksmiths go outside to do their jobs. And they said, "Well, our car's literally right there." And he looks out the door and he says, "That would be outside." And he didn't unlock their car. They had to put a rock through the window. And I had to call the guy who wrote the essay. His name is Ben. I had a couple of questions for him. And I apologized to him. I said, on behalf of all Texans, I would like to apologize that this happened to you in 1992. And I loved his answer. He said, "You know what? If the Bush-Quayle campaign bus was going through Arkansas, and the same thing would have happened." And I think are we out of time? I'm looking, do we have to quit?
I think there's time for one more. What about Mrs. Bush and the monkey brain story?
And the what?
Monkey brain?
Monkey brain?
The monkey brain story?
Oh, that's gross.
Yeah, what?
We actually had, I'm so sad, Kim Brady Cutler was supposed to come today, and she didn't come, I'm sure because of the weather. This is during the VP years.
She didn't come because she thought Vicki was going to
But
ask
Vicki
this
was going to
question.
make her tell this story. Gosh, I can barely remember it. But she's wife of the Vice President of the United States, and he's off meeting with some people, and she's trying to make friends with the natives and their native customs. Basically, they cut the head off of a monkey and and they're eating the monkey brains. I'm trying to forget this story, Vicki. They're literally cut the head off a monkey, and there's blood everywhere, and they're pulling out the brains. And poor Barbara Bush is trying to pretend that this is a lovely custom. And then they
Turned out it was a bad actor who was trying to freak her out. So.
As it turns out, it was a guy who should have never been there. Andy, where the hell was the Secret Service? The guy should have never been there to begin with. So I'll tell one of my favorite stories. You'd be thinking of yours that you haven't told yet. I was very surprised when I got
Did you just tell me I could have another moment?
What?
I can tell a story?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
All right. So who knew that Robert M. Gates III, former Secretary of Defense, former head of the CIA, was an advanced person at one point in his life? He was with the National Security Council during both President Ford and President Carter's administrations. He, of course, was part of the National Security, number 2 to Brent Scowcroft under 41. But this is back when he was low-level CIA. And he was tasked over to the White House basically to do pre-advance. When President Ford or President Carter traveled abroad, Bob was one of the people sent from the foreign policy security teams to do pre-advance with the president.
He was a spy.
He was a spy. I was trying okay, you shouldn't have said that. That's worse than tunnels. He was a spy. Anyway, they go to Martinique. President Ford is going to meet with the president of France on the island of Martinique in the Caribbean. It is, of course, French held. And so the French are the hosts. They're hosting this meeting. And so the White House pre-advance team gets there. And the French tell the White House folks that the president of France really wants this meeting to take place in a cabana on the beach. He feels this would be a great setting, very relaxed. It's going to be beautiful weather.
Good for tourism.
So that's a terrible thing to say. So the White House advance team said, okay, let's go take a look at it. It was a topless beach. And Bob writes, he writes a great essay. And the bottom line is they did not meet there. And I cannot remember if Bob put this in the essay or if he told us this later, that when Bob said to the French advance team, no, we're not meeting on a topless beach, they're French. They didn't get the problem. They're like, what? What's the problem? But
I'll tell one more. It's a Bruce Zanka story.
oh, I love the Bruce Zanka story.
Bruce Zanka was a great advanced guy, worked for both Presidents Bush, and this is 1988, and Newsweek did a hit story on then Vice President Bush titled The Wimp Factor. And it was not well received in Bush world, this article by Newsweek. And we were traveling on the road, and Margaret Warner, the author of the piece, was in the press pool, and we were moving from a hotel to an event site, and she was late for the motorcade, I believe, as Bruce writes in the essay, by at least 30 to 45 seconds. She was late for the motorcade. And so he gave the all clear, and the motorcade left without her. And he, arranged for a car to bring her to the event site. So it was sort of an up and in fastball. It wasn't really a bad thing. But anyway, then Vice President Bush heard about this, because he heard about everything, I don't know if you knew that, but as former CIA director, he had tentacles everywhere. And we hadn't barely gotten to the event site, and he called for Bruce to be brought to the holding room and said, is it true that you abandoned Margaret at the hotel? Well, no, sir. Yes, we did. But she's on her way in a car. He said, that's not the way we roll, Bruce. And he was serious, by the way. This was who he was, right, and his character. He said, that's not how we roll. We don't do that to people. And, we'll stand for ourselves, and it's okay. And he said, I'll apologize, sir, and they'll all be fine. And he's leaving the room, and Mrs. Bush said, Bruce, that was great. I would have done the same thing. So.
I think that's the perfect place to end. Thank you so much. Y'all are a great
Thank you all.
audience. Thank you. We were supposed to tell you We'll be down there. If we haven't signed your book yet, we'll meet you down there. If I can figure out how to get off the stage, we'll be over there.
Should I go first, or do you want me to sort of shadow you?
I want you to